Okay, so today I'm talking about the Jupiter-Saturn double return, and this is a really interesting cycle because it actually is the timing when the Jupiter return and the Saturn return align. And I was keyed into this because of actually a reading I got, and in the course of that reading I was suggested to get my grandmother's birth chart, which I do have a pretty decent time for her. There's a range for her birth time, so the rising sign isn't exact, but her Jupiter and Saturn are going to be within a few degree minutes or 1 or 2 degree minutes, even with that birth time range. And I noticed that her Jupiter and Saturn are conjoined my Jupiter and Saturn, and it was shocking to me because this was my favorite grandparent. This is my grandmother. She took care of me, was kind of a surrogate mother. We had a really special connection. She had 20 some odd grandkids, and I was one of the 1 or 2 closest of all of those grandkids to her and got to spend the most time with her. She actually passed away last year at age 97. So I had this really long and lovely life. And we had this Jupiter-Saturn synastry. And so it really opened up for me this idea that Jupiter and Saturn can be important in synastry, 1, but 2, there's a cycle. And she was about 59 years older than me. And you know, the orbital period of Jupiter is 11.86 years. The orbital period of Saturn is 29.5 years. And so just some simple mathematics, 29.5 times 2 is 59, and 11.89 times 5 is 59.45. So your second Saturn return is your 5th Jupiter return. And that's different than the first Saturn return, because during your first Saturn return, Jupiter will have completed its second trip around the zodiac and will be making its 3rd trip, but it's not matched with that natal position, so it's not a Jupiter return during your first Saturn return, but it is during your second, and that's the point of the video. So the Great Conjunction cycle is something that's very important to astrologers and has been important to astrologers, and this is when Jupiter and Saturn conjoin in the sky. The transiting Jupiter and Saturn make that conjunction, and I just mentioned this because it gives us indication that we have techniques that have been built up around Jupiter and Saturn's orbital periods and their cycles with each other. So this is kind of an offshoot or a tangentially related version of that, but it might underscore why it could be important. So the first example I wanted to look at was the Berlin Gnostic Codex number 8502. And this was, I was reading this, I'm reading this now, and I noticed the dates here in the introduction. It was discovered in 1896, but it wasn't published until 1955. Really, anytime I see dates, I'll just punch it up quickly in my solar fire and just check out where the planets were during that, during any 2 dates that I'm offered. And so the one thing about the Berlin Codex, the secret book of John, the Apocryphon of John, like it says here, is the most widely known of all Sethian treatises. It's sort of the most famous, or one of the most famous Gnostic texts. This is actually from the Marvin Meyer translation, his introduction to his translation. And so it was discovered in January 1896. This German guy, Karl Reinhardt, bought the codex near Cairo. It was unearthed sometime around this period. We don't really have an exact date, but if you punch up the chart, 1st of January 1896, Saturn 16 Scorpio, Jupiter 7 Leo, and the interesting thing about it is that the Berlin Codex was not published until 1955, like I just said. So there's this, for the second half of 1955, you have this double Saturn-Jupiter return happening, and this is when the translations of the Berlin Codex 8502 get released. That after it's published, it sort of re-emerges on the scene and was available during the second half of this year during its Jupiter and Saturn return. Now, I've looked for a date of the publication in 1955 of the Codex, and I just can't find a month in all of the citations I've scoured. But this was a guy, W.C. Till, a German individual, a Die Gnostischen Schriften des Koptischen Papyrus Berlinensis, 8502. So it's a German text. They published it in German. But again, I can't find the date, but it doesn't matter, because that second half of the year, even if it was published before Jupiter's ingress into Leo, it times the kind of wide availability, and I'm sure there were reviews written and people were talking about it during that second half of the year. Okay. So the next example I want to look at is the upcoming transit, 11 February 2021, we have a pileup of 6 of the 7 traditional planets in Aquarius. You've probably already heard about this if you're into astrology. It's going to be a really Aquarius-heavy moment. Jupiter and Saturn will both be in Aquarius, and I mention it because it kicks in this question. Well, what was happening 59 years before? What is this chart in 2021, the Jupiter-Saturn double return of? And it's this great 1962 Aquarius stellium. And you type it into Google and you can get astrological articles and write-ups and people really describing what this meant, or was supposed to have meant. I actually wrote an article in AIM Infinity Astrological Magazine, published in their issue number 23 in early 2019, called The Great Stellium, a cycle of planetary co-presence. This is actually the chart of the Great Stellium before Caesar was assassinated. But I talk a little bit in there about this 1962 chart. I just mentioned this in case you're curious about exploring the idea of a Great Stellium further, which is when all 7 traditional planets hit the same sign. I will do a video on this at some point. But the thing about this 1962 Great Stellium in Aquarius is that people were freaking out. I mean, there's even an entry in Astro Databank about the Antichrist's nativity being during this time. I guess someone was theorizing the Antichrist would be born in Egypt during this Great Stellium. You can see the chart for the Antichrist there. There's all those planets in Aquarius. I guess this theory set those planets to be on the ascendant. But the other thing is that we have 2 nativities. So we have Clint Black, the country singer. I wish I knew one of his songs and I would start singing it here. And then we have Jennifer Jason Leigh, the actress, the interesting actress, kind of the Aquarian actress. I don't know if you saw her in the movie. There was a sci-fi movie with Natalie Portman that came out recently. The name's escaping. But she plays this very Aquarian kind of soldier where they enter into this sci-fi zone. And it's a so maybe you can see some of that manifesting in terms of how we perceive Jennifer Jason Leigh in her career. Clint Black I'm less familiar with, but I will say we can look during this. I will be Googling both of their names during February 2021, and just to see if there's a theme that emerges in their lives. It's very, very interesting. But we can also look back what was happening in 1962. So in February of that year, John Glenn became the first American to, I guess, travel in space or orbit the Earth, and so maybe we're going to see in 2021 something with SpaceX or something with space travel, that this theme will be kind of reemergent. And this is quintessentially Aquarian because of the air sign that Aquarius is, traveling through the air, and the science and the technology and the Mercury and the Saturn. It's all this sort of Aquarian space travel energy. I will say cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin was the first human being in space, and that happened the year before John Glenn. But it's right in this zone of this Aquarius stellium. So I think that we can maybe just say that there is this kind of spatial space travel element to that Aquarian energy. The other events around that year, here's a list of them. The one thing I do want to note is Bob Dylan released his first record. It's called Bob Dylan, and he recently released it in April 1962. And right now we are seeing a new Bob Dylan album, Rough and Rowdy Ways. Now we're several months out of this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius, but still, like I said, there's a little bit of a leeway here, maybe on either side, a few months on either side, where this energy can be sort of tapped into. So maybe this is a Dylan record. He's really old. We've got his first record in 1962. Will this be his last record? I doubt it. This guy's got a lot of staying power. It's an amazing album, by the way, if you want to listen. He's got a track on there called Murder Most Foul about the JFK assassination, which actually happened when Saturn was in Aquarius in 1963. Saturn is now in Aquarius, and he's writing about JFK. Cartomancy pool, this is uncanny. I use a random number generator, like I've said, and this Discord card, I've done 6 of these talks. It's come up three of them. And this is the decan, right, where Jupiter and Saturn will conjoin in December 2020. So it's really telling me, as a side, I mean, people say, well, random number generator, how can that tell you anything about reality? Well, this is uncannily how it does. It just seems to randomly select things that have great meaning. And I think it can speak to the nature of our reality, the nature of the universe, the nature of divination, that we're tapped in to this kind of lattice work or Mother Gaia, where it really doesn't, You don't need anything special. The randomness actually does provide this sort of great knowledge and great access into reality for us, and we're seeing that here. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the medicalization side of Aquarius, and particularly with the Aquarius Venus entryway into that. And I think sometimes we can sort of pathologize our pleasure, right? Is it wrong to feel pleasure? If I like something or like touch, is that somehow an addiction? I mean, I'm really sensitive to people that have addiction issues, but I think we can give ourselves permission in this fixed air sign, the kind of authoritarian that Aquarius can sometimes be, to continue to access the touch and, even just singing. I mean, sing in the shower, you can feel the vibration of those vocal cords, and there's something very primal and kind of transcendently primal about that I think can give us maybe relief during what can otherwise be this sort of hard, medicalized, sterilized period that Aquarius is. And we're seeing that now. People, are having to really deal with this separation and being alone and being medicalized. And so I think just remember to stay in your body, stay in touch with your Venus, and maybe this energy can provide an egress. All right. As always, you can book a donation-based reading with me, sjanderson144.com. I look forward to reading for you. I also want to just say I've got this audio is available on a lot of these podcast players, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. So, be sure if you are on those and you like to have audio delivered to you in that form, you can go there. And as always, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at sjanderson144.